Wes, 30, auto detailer. Spend my days scrubbing other people's cars until they shine like new money. Guy drops off a filthy SUV in the morning, gets back something that looks fresh off the lot by the afternoon, barely nods, drives away. You learn fast in this line of work that people take the good stuff for granted. A car that took me 5 hours to bring back to life gets a shrug and a card tap. And that's the whole thank you. Figured being underappreciated at the shop was about as bad as it got. Then I went on one date and got myself a whole new education in being taken for granted. Let me back up and tell it properly, because the ending doesn't hit unless you sit through the middle with me. Been single a good while, not out of some grand plan or some healing phase. Just never met anyone worth rearranging my week for. A buddy of mine kept writing me about it for months, said I was being lazy, said the apps aren't nearly as bad as I made them out to be if I actually put in the effort. Told him the apps and I had a bad history, that I'd tried them before and come away with nothing but wasted evenings and a lighter wallet. He wore me down over a couple of weekends anyway, kept saying I'd never meet anyone standing around a garage all day breathing in tire cleaner. So one evening after work, I sat down and made a profile. Took me longer to write the profile than I'll admit. Kept second-guessing whether being straight about the job would scare people off. Put up 3 or 4 decent pictures, nothing staged, one of me at the shop standing next to a car I was genuinely proud of. Wrote a few honest sentences about myself, didn't lie, didn't inflate a single thing. Said flat out that I detail cars for a living and that I actually enjoy the work. Didn't dress it up as automotive care specialist or any of that puffed up nonsense. Just said plainly what I do all day. Matched with a woman I'll call Sloan, since that's close enough, and she doesn't need me putting the real one out there for the whole internet. Almost didn't swipe on her, if I'm being honest, but the profile was well put together, and the first message she sent was actually funny. We got past the awkward opening stretch pretty quick, which I took as a good sign at the time, since most matches die in the first 3 messages. Her pictures were nice, I'll give her that much going in, and her profile mentioned something about being independent and knowing her worth. Should have read that worth line a second time and thought a little harder about what it was quietly trying to tell me. Didn't though, because she was easy on the eyes, and I was giving the whole thing a fair, open-minded shot. We texted back and forth for about 4 days before the date itself. The first day or two, the conversation ran fine. Better than fine even, normal stuff, about work and weekends and which side of town we each lived on. She replied quick, had a bit of a sharp sense of humor, and I caught myself actually looking forward to seeing her name light up my phone. We found a bit of common ground on music and food, enough that I figured we'd at least have plenty to talk about across a table for a couple of hours. That's the part that stings a little looking back, that for a few days there, I honestly thought this might turn out to be one of the good ones. At one point she asked what kind of car I drove, and when I told her she said "oh" in a way that carried a whole paragraph. Brought up more than once how her standards were high and how she wasn't like other girls about that kind of thing. Read all of it as normal dating chatter and kept things friendly because everybody talks themselves up a little at the start. Told myself the in-person version would probably be warmer than the texts, since some people just come off flat over a screen. Somewhere in the middle of all that, she made a comment about how most men have no clue how to plan a date. Said the last handful of guys she'd gone out with all expected her to do the work of picking the place, making the reservation, sorting out the details. Told her not to worry about any of that, that I'd take care of the planning myself. Read it at the time as a normal enough thing to say. A guy showing a little initiative, nothing worth a second thought. She also mentioned early on that she didn't do cheap, which I laughed off then and probably shouldn't have. She asked a couple of pointed questions about what I could bring to the table, which I answered honestly and didn't clock as the warning sign it turned out to be. Picked out a place I already knew was solid, not the flashiest restaurant in the city by any stretch, but a real sit-down spot with good food, strong reviews, and prices that don't require a second mortgage to walk out of. The kind of place where you eat well and still sleep just fine after you get a look at the total. Ran the choice by her, and she said it worked, which I read as a straightforward yes at the time. Looking back on it now, that one small word "worked" was doing an awful lot of quiet lifting. We locked it in for a Friday at 7 in the evening. Spent a little of the week actually looking forward to it, which I'll admit now feels a bit silly given how it went. Even asked a coworker for a restaurant recommendation to double-check my pick. Wanted the night to go smooth for both of us. The day of the date, I made a point of wrapping up my last car a little early so I wouldn't be scrambling. Scrubbed the wax and the chemical smell off myself in the shower, which honestly takes more than one go when you've had your hands in it all day. Put on a clean button-down, the good one, ironed the collar and the sleeves and everything. Even ran my own car through the wash, which felt a touch ridiculous for a guy who cleans cars for a living. But first impressions are first impressions, and I wasn't about to roll up in a dusty truck. Headed out the door with plenty of time to spare, because my dad drilled it into me a long time ago that showing up late tells a person exactly what you think of their time. My buddy texted right before I left, said good luck and to report back, threw in some joke about me finally leaving the garage for one night, told him I'd fill him in after, not knowing yet just how much there'd end up being to fill him in on. Pulled into the restaurant lot a solid 10 minutes ahead of 7. Told the host it was a table for 2, got seated over by the window, ordered myself a water, and settled in to wait. 7 o'clock rolled around, no Sloan. 7:10 came, still nothing, and no message either. Not a single, hey, running a few minutes behind. No heads up of any kind. Checked my phone twice to make sure I hadn't somehow missed a text, but the screen just sat there empty. A waiter swung by around then, real friendly young guy, asked whether I wanted to go ahead and order or keep waiting, and I told him I'd give it a few more minutes. Caught myself hoping she was just stuck in traffic and would come in apologizing, which shows you how much slack I was still willing to give a stranger. The waiter refilled my water twice while I sat there alone, and each time he did it without making me feel like the guy who'd just been stood up. Started drafting a polite, everything okay, text around 7:15, then deleted it. Figured I'd give it to the half hour before saying anything. A full half hour of my Friday evening, gone before the date had even technically started. Told the waiter, when he came back, that she'd just walked in, and he gave me a look that said he'd seen this exact scene play out plenty of times before. At roughly 7:20, the door finally opened, and there she was. Looked just like her pictures. I'll give credit where credit's due. Crossed the room without any rush at all, sat herself down across from me, and the very first thing out of her mouth wasn't hello, and it sure wasn't sorry. She took a slow look around the room, gave this little shrug, and said the place would do. Not one single word about being 20 minutes late while I sat there nursing a glass of water like a fool. Decided right then to just let it slide. Told her it was good to finally meet her in person after all that texting. She'd already flipped the menu open before I even got to the end of that sentence. We hadn't even sorted out drinks yet when she set the menu back down. Looked me dead in the eye, all serious, like she had some kind of announcement to make. Said she wanted to be clear about something up front before we got any further into the evening. Told me, in so many words, that she doesn't believe in splitting bills. Said that when a man invites a woman out, the man pays, end of discussion, and that for her, the whole thing comes down to respect. Delivered it completely flat, no smile, like she was reading me the fine print before I signed on a dotted line. The way she framed it, paying wasn't a nice thing a guy might choose to do. It was a bill I'd already run up just by asking her to show up. I just nodded and said, "That's fine, no problem at all." Quietly tucked that word away, respect, somewhere in the back of my head, because something told me it might come back around before the night was through. Had no idea in that moment just how right that little hunch was going to end up being. The friendly waiter came back and asked if we'd like to start with some drinks. She ordered a cocktail, then tacked on a second one before the first had even reached the table, and added, "Since you're buying," with a small smile she clearly thought was charming. Then she went straight for one of the most expensive plates on the whole menu. Didn't so much as glance at the number printed next to it. Watched her do it with the ease of someone who's done it 100 times. Ordering the top of the menu because the check was never going to be her problem. I kept mine simple, ordered a normal dinner and a soda, thanked the waiter, and tried to steer the whole thing somewhere a little lighter. Asked her how her week had been going, got about half a sentence back, and then her phone lit up and she was gone. Thumbs flying across the screen, that glow lighting up under her chin, while I sat there feeling like part of the table setting. Waited it out, took a sip of my drink, watched a couple 2 tables over who were actually looking at each other while they talked, actually listening to each other. When she finally came up for air, I tried a fresh angle, asked what she liked to do for fun outside of work. A shrug, a flat stuff, and then her attention dropped right back down to the phone. The appetizer showed up, and she moved it around the plate a bit without really eating any of it. Somewhere between that and the main course arriving, she finally decided to take part in the conversation. And the way she chose to kick it off was to ask me what I did for work. Again, like the entire 4 days of texting and the first 10 minutes at the table had been quietly wiped clean. Told her the same thing I'd already said twice, detailing, I bring cars back to life. Been at it for years, keep a full schedule, and there's real money in it when you do it well. She pulled a face. Not a small one either, a full production, eyebrows climbing up, the corners of her mouth pulling down. Said she just kind of figured a guy my age would have a real career by now. Could have let that one sink in and sour the rest of the meal, but I wasn't about to hand her the satisfaction of watching it land. Told her I'd likely take home more in a good month than plenty of guys with fancier titles and far worse hours, and left it right there on the table between us. She wasn't really listening to that part anyway. She'd already lined up her next subject. Then the waiter came back to refill the water, and she barely acknowledged him, cut him off mid-sentence to keep talking. That told me most of what I needed to know about her, honestly, more than anything she said directly. Her next subject unfolded into a full speech, launched into how men these days just don't put in the effort anymore, how the whole lot of them have gone soft, how her mother's generation had men who showed up, and now it's nothing but weak guys who want the world handed to them on a plate. How a real man invests, provides, plans ahead, pays for things without being asked. Sat there, ate my food, let her run the entire lap without cutting in once. Every so often she'd loop back around to how worn out she was by male entitlement, by men who act like they're owed something just for breathing, which was a genuinely funny line to hear from a person halfway through the second cocktail I was footing the bill for. Kept that particular observation to myself, obviously. No sense poking the bear halfway through dinner. Just nodded along and let her empty the whole tank at her own pace. Partway through the meal, she called me by the wrong name, said a name that was flat out not mine, some other guy's name entirely. Dropped it right in the middle of a sentence, smooth as anything, no hesitation at all. Flagged it as politely as I could, told her that's actually not my name. She flicked her hand and said, same thing, and rolled right on without missing a single beat. That was the exact moment I quit hoping the evening might swing back around into something decent. Because it wasn't going to swing anywhere, it was just going to keep being this for another hour, and I quietly made my peace with that. The food was good, at least I'll hand the restaurant that much. She barely touched hers, spent more time angling her phone to get the right photo of the plate than actually eating off of it. Talked at me the entire time. Never once really to me, for the better part of the meal. Heard all about her ex, heard about her coworkers, heard a long stretch about how men in general keep letting her down at every possible turn. Every single story she told had the exact same shape to it, her being the one reasonable person in the room, and some man being the whole problem. At one point, she mentioned that she and her friends have a whole system for judging whether a guy is worth a second date, complete with actual rules. Said the bill was the first test, and most men fail immediately, and laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever come up with. Threw in a crack about people who overtip just to look generous, which was rich considering who was about to be tipping at that table. Told me about a guy at work she was sure had a problem with her, then a friend's boyfriend she couldn't stand, then a cousin who didn't get it. I've run into people like that before, where you're not really a person to them so much as the next available audience to perform in front of. Kept my replies short, stayed polite, checked the time now and then without making any kind of show out of it. Eventually, the plates got cleared and the waiter came back around, asked about dessert and coffee. She went for a dessert naturally, plus one more drink on top of the two, and I told him just the check for me, thanks. While we waited on it, she leaned back and said the food here was fine, I guess, like she was doing the whole place a personal favor by finishing the meal. Somewhere in there she asked whether I owned the shop or just worked there, and when I said I mostly worked there, she gave a little nod, like that settled something for her. The dessert came and she ate about 2 bites of it before pushing it aside and getting back on her phone, which by that point I'd stopped expecting anything different from. Then she asked, half serious, whether I always dressed like this, and I said only when I'm trying, which went right over her head. The check finally landed on the table, and I did the exact thing she'd announced she expected of me 2 hours earlier. Did the quick math in my head, and it was easily the priciest dinner I'd bought in a long time. Most of it drinks and a plate she barely touched. Paid the whole tab, every last line item, didn't flinch, didn't make it awkward, didn't say a single word about the total. Left the waiter a solid tip on top of all of it, because that kid did his job right the entire night, and he was the only soul at that table who'd said thank you to anybody. She watched me sign the slip with this small, satisfied little look, like the natural order of the universe had just been confirmed on paper, right in front of her eyes. Then out came the phone again, and I figured, all right, back to the scrolling. Half expected her to at least thank me for dinner, but that thought clearly never crossed her mind, since in her world, it was just what was owed. Except this time, she wasn't scrolling at all, she was planning. Started telling me about some brand new place downtown that had just opened up. Way nicer than where we were, insisted I'd love it. Asked if Friday worked for the next one. Said it like the matter was already fully settled, like the second date was a done deal. And all that was left was for her to pick out the venue on my behalf. And here's the part that really got me, the part I keep circling back to. She wasn't asking whether I even wanted to see her again. She took it as a given, the same flat way you take it as a given that the sun's coming up in the morning. After the 20 minutes late, after the wrong name, after the speeches and the third drink on my tab and the real career crack, she just assumed I was already locked in for round 2. I stood up, took my jacket off the back of the chair, put it on nice and unhurried, in no rush whatsoever. And then I used her own words right back on her, the same flat tone she'd used on me 2 hours before. Told her, look, I want to be clear about something up front. Said, I don't believe in second dates. Told her that when a woman treats a first date like a job interview, she's already dead certain she aced. I pass. And I said it, plain as she had, it's about respect. Then I wished her a good night and walked out. Didn't slam a single thing, didn't raise my voice, didn't hang around to watch it land on her face. Just turned for the door, crossed the lot, and got into my very clean car. The last thing I caught on the way out was her sitting there with her mouth hanging open and a guy at the next table over, trying and completely failing to keep a straight face into his napkin. Caught the waiter's eye on my way past and told him the tip was for putting up with all of it, and he cracked the first real smile I'd seen all night. Walked out into the cool air of the parking lot and felt my shoulders drop about 2 inches, like I'd set down something heavy I hadn't noticed I was carrying. Drove home feeling lighter than I'd felt all week. Not because I'd won something. There was nothing there worth winning in the first place. Just because I didn't have to sit through a second serving of that evening, and honestly that was more than enough. The relief of walking away clean, without a fight, without owing anybody an explanation, was worth more than any second date could have been. Didn't need to prove a point to her or to anybody watching. Didn't need the last word, just needed the door and my own car and a quiet drive home. Rolled the window down, let the night air in, put on something I actually liked on the radio, and the drive home turned out to be the best part of the whole night. Stopped and grabbed a burger on the way back, ate it right there in the parking lot, and that greasy bag was better company than the dinner I'd just paid a small fortune for. She did text me that night, actually, a couple of hours after I got home. First message asked if I was seriously leaving like that, then a second one calling it embarrassing, then a third saying I'd regret it. Didn't reply to a single one of them, just read them and set the phone face down, because there was nothing there worth answering. The text stopped after the third, and I honestly thought that was the end of it. Figured that was the end of the whole thing. A bad date, a clean exit, a decent story to tell my buddy over the weekend, and then forget all about. Should have known it wasn't going to wrap up quite that neatly. A couple of days later, the same friend who'd talked me onto the apps in the first place sends me a message out of nowhere. Just reads, "Bro, did you see what she posted about you?" I hadn't seen anything, because I don't spend much of my life scrolling through that kind of stuff. He sends over a screenshot, then a second, then a third, because whatever she'd written ran on for a while. She'd put together a whole essay about the date, paragraphs of the thing. And the version she was telling the world was not remotely the version I'd actually sat through. In her telling of it, she came out as the innocent victim of a cruel, humiliating man. Wrote that I'd invited her out, and then abandoned her at the table on purpose, specifically to make her feel small in front of a room full of people. Claimed I'd walked out on a woman I had personally asked to dinner, which in her framing made me some kind of coward who couldn't handle a strong personality across the table. the word toxic showed up more than once, practically in bold letters. Said men like me are exactly what's wrong with dating out there, that I'd shown my true colors the very second things stopped going my way. Wrote that this is precisely what male toxicity looks like the moment a woman refuses to just play along and be sweet and agreeable. Painted herself as a woman who simply had standards and got cruelly punished for daring to hold on to them. The whole post was engineered, top to bottom, to pull in a big wave of sympathy. And for maybe an hour going by what my friend was watching in real time, it actually worked the way she wanted it to. The first handful of comments were solidly on her side. The usual, "so sorry you had to go through this. Men are the absolute worst," that whole familiar routine. Then people started actually reading the thing all the way through, top to bottom, instead of just reacting to the first line. Because buried right there in the middle of her own post, telling her own side in her own words, she'd included the exact part where she laid out her rules at the very start of the date. She wrote, and she wrote it proudly, that she'd told me right away she doesn't believe in splitting bills, that a man should always be the one to pay, that for her, it all comes down to respect. Dropped it in there, like it was a point in her own favor, like it made her look strong and principled and completely put together. What it actually did was hand every single reader the whole entire story on a silver platter. The comment section turned, and it turned fast. One of the first people to flip it was somebody going, "Wait, so you don't believe in splitting the bill, but you're upset that he doesn't believe in a second date?" Right underneath that, another person pointed out that I literally handed her own exact line straight back to her, nearly word for word. Somebody else wrote that respect apparently only counts when it's flowing in one single direction. Then a fourth chimed in that she'd basically sat down and written the guy's entire legal defense for him, for free, and posted it herself. Somebody pointed out the irony that she'd spent the whole post calling the guy toxic, while describing herself demanding money from a stranger over dinner. Another person wrote that the second she made the bill a rule, she made it fair game to have a rule used right back, and that she'd only lost because she wrote both rules herself. It kept snowballing exactly like that, one comment after the next. Person after person quoting her own rule right back at her, under her own post, using nothing at all but the words she'd typed out with her own two hands. Nobody had to invent a thing or twist a single detail. She'd laid it all out, plain as day, and they were simply holding a mirror up to it. She started replying to the comments, which is the one move that never, ever helps a person standing in that particular spot. Tried to explain that it was different, that the two things weren't the same thing at all, not even close. Argued that the bill and the second date had absolutely nothing to do with one another, and that everyone was deliberately twisting her words around. But the harder she pushed back, the more people rolled in, because the entire point was that the two things were exactly the same, and she was the only one in the whole thread who couldn't seem to see it. At some point, she started calling the commenters toxic too, reaching for the same word again. Labeled the whole thing a pile-on, called it harassment, said the reaction just proved every single thing she'd already said about men. The only problem with that was a big chunk of the people calling her out weren't men at all. Plenty of women in that thread were telling her, flat out, that she'd embarrassed herself, that she'd made every woman with real, actual standards look bad by association. A few of them said they'd have walked out on that date too, that they wouldn't dream of sitting across from someone laying down financial terms before the drinks even showed up. One woman wrote that having standards and having a double standard aren't the same thing, and that Sloan had very clearly gotten the two of them mixed up. Another said, the whole post read like a confession she didn't realize she was making. That seemed to be the part that got under her skin the most, the women flat out refusing to line up behind her. The post kept climbing the whole time, more views, more comments piling on top of each other, but every last bit of it running the opposite direction from what she'd been going for. Every fresh person who stumbled onto it found the exact same contradiction sitting right there in her own handwriting, just waiting for them. Somebody even recognized the restaurant from a detail she'd let slip, and joked that the waiter probably had a better Friday night than either one of us. A few people started asking, half joking, whether the guy in the story wanted to come, give his side, which my buddy found absolutely hysterical. Someone who apparently knew her in real life left a comment saying this whole thing tracked with how she treated people, and that one got a lot of quiet agreement under it. A couple more people chimed in that they'd heard similar stories about her. And while I couldn't tell how much of that was real, it clearly wasn't helping her case any. The mutual who'd introduced us through the app went quiet the entire time, didn't pick a side, just stopped bringing her up at all after that. A couple of accounts tried to step in and defend her, and got buried under the same simple question as everyone else. The bill and the second date, again and again. The post got screenshotted and reposted somewhere else entirely, where a fresh crowd of strangers picked it apart from scratch and reached the exact same conclusion. A top comment on that repost just laid it out clean, that she'd invented a rule to benefit herself, then got mad when the same rule got aimed back at her. Her one last reply, before everything went dark, was something about how nobody understood the nuance, which of course only got quoted and laughed at more. The running joke by the end was people thanking her for the free lesson in how to handle a first date, signed off with her own line about respect. A fair number of comments actually landed on the guy's side without knowing a thing about him, saying that leaving quietly instead of making a scene was the classy way to handle it. One person summed the whole mess up in a single line, that she wrote a post to prove men were the problem and accidentally proved she was, and that one climbed straight to the top. By the time it all died down, the numbers on that post were the kind you don't want. Thousands of people, none of them reading it the way she'd hoped. My buddy said watching it unfold in real time was better than anything on TV that week, kept refreshing it to catch the newest comment. What got me was that I never had to lift a finger, never had to defend myself or explain. The whole thing sorted itself out on the strength of her own words alone. Every so often a comment would pop up, guessing at what kind of guy would just walk out like that. And the answer was a lot more boring than any of them imagined, just a tired detailer who'd had enough. She started deleting the comments she was actually able to delete, but they were coming in faster than she could ever clear them out. Then she went in and edited the original post to cut out the part about the bill, hoping to quietly rescue the whole thing. Except, plenty of people had already screenshotted the original version, so all the edit really accomplished was proving she knew exactly what the problem was the entire time, which somehow managed to make her look even worse than before. The screenshots started getting passed around on their own, the original sitting right next to the edited version, so you could see exactly what she'd tried to bury. A little while after all that, the entire post came down. A day or so later, her whole profile went private, then just went completely quiet. No new anything, no comeback, no follow-up. The app match dried up too, unmatched at some point in there, which honestly felt like the least surprising part of the whole story. My buddy kept me posted through the entire thing, feeding me the fallout piece by piece and laughing his way through every single update he sent. Me, I didn't post one single word about any of it, didn't comment, didn't gloat, didn't reach out to her, didn't take a screenshot of my own to save. There was genuinely nothing left for me to add to the whole situation. She'd built the entire case against herself far better than I ever could have managed, even if I'd sat down and actually tried to. The closest I came to saying anything at all was telling my friend that I was never, ever letting him talk me back onto those apps again as long as I live. He said that was more than fair, and that he'd earned that one honestly. The next morning I went back to work like it was any other day, put the whole thing behind me, had a full schedule waiting on me, a couple of regulars on the books, and one guy dropping off a car that looked like it had personally lost a fight with a construction site. Mud packed deep into the wheel wells, something sticky dried into all the cup holders, a back seat I genuinely did not want to think about too hard. Put my headphones in and got to it, one section at a time, no rush. Hours of the thing, the wash, the clay bar, the polish, the little detail brushes for the vents and the door seams that nobody in the world ever notices or thanks you for. Somewhere in the middle of it, one of my regulars came in to pick up his truck, older guy, always shakes my hand, always tells me it looks great, and he always means it when he says it. Little thing, but after the week I just had it landed heavier than usual, told him to have a good one and actually meant it back. The next day brought another full slate, a minivan with crayon melted into one of the seats in a sedan that hadn't seen a vacuum in what looked like years. Put in the hours, got both of them looking sharp, and by the end of that day the whole date felt like something that had happened to some other guy entirely. A customer that afternoon actually thanked me twice and told me she'd recommend the shop to her whole family, and I don't think she'll ever know how much that small thing meant that particular week. Funny thing about the work is, it doesn't argue with you, doesn't keep score, doesn't call you the wrong name, and then say same thing when you correct it. A dirty car is honest about what it is, and when you're done, it's honest about that too. And there's a kind of peace in that I didn't fully appreciate until that week. My buddy swung by the shop that afternoon, still laughing about the post, and finally admitted the apps had been a mistake and that he'd lay off pushing them. We grabbed food after work, and that meal was everything the restaurant one wasn't: cheap and easy and actually decent company. No rules read out at the start, no scorekeeping, no phone glued to a hand across the table, just two guys eating and laughing about how sideways the week had gone. By the time I was finished, that beat-up construction car looked better than it probably had the day the guy first drove it off the lot, years and years ago. The owner came by later in the afternoon to pick it up, walked a slow circle around the thing, didn't say a whole lot, handed over what he owed, and pulled straight out of the lot. No thank you, not even so much as a nod, same as it ever is with most of them. And standing there in the shop with the smell of wax hanging in the air and that clean car rolling out through the front gate, I actually caught myself laughing out loud, because that quiet, unbothered, he paid what he owed and went on his way thing, that was still somehow more honest than the entire evening I'd spent sitting across the table from Sloan. The car didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. The guy didn't pretend either. The money was real, and the work was real, and the whole deal was square and clean. Nobody ran me a speech about respect while ordering a third drink on my tab. Funny how a filthy construction car ended up being far better company than a date I got dressed up and ironed a shirt for. Been turning the whole thing over in my head since, in the slow way you do when there's downtime between jobs and the radio's playing low in the background. I don't really hold anything against her when it all comes down to it. She made her choices out loud, in writing, in front of everybody, and the internet just handed her the bill for them, which is more or less the exact thing she stood there and said she believed in. If anything, she taught me something without ever once meaning to teach me a thing. Turns out I believe in plenty of things myself. Believe in showing up on time, believe in saying thank you to the person who brings your food, believe in paying for what you actually order without whining about the number. The splitting the bill thing was never my hill to die on, not once. I'd have gladly covered dinner and not thought twice about it if the person sitting across from me had been worth covering. A second date with someone like that, though. That's the one belief I'm holding on to, and I'm not letting go of it. Haven't been back on the apps, and I'm in no hurry to change that. Whatever my buddy says, next time he gets an idea. If I meet someone, I'll meet them the normal way, at the shop or through people I actually trust, not by matching with a set of rules dressed up as a person. And if she's the kind who reads you the terms before the drinks arrive, well, I already know how that story ends because I lived the whole thing once already. Anyway, that's the whole story, start to finish. No exaggerating any of it. Tip your waiters, take care of your cars, and if somebody reads you the rules on the way in, don't act so surprised when you get to use them right back on the way out.